What happens when the most feared man in prison gets released on parole? For Dean Daniel Kelsie, the notorious Hells Angels hitman whose very presence made hardened inmates sleep outside their own rooms, freedom proved more challenging than the concrete walls that once contained him. From his first arrest at 18 to becoming the cold-blooded executioner who gunned down Sean Simmons for having an affair with a club member's wife, Kelsie's path was paved with escalating violence and intimidation. But it's what happened when authorities tried to reintegrate him into society that truly reveals the depth of his menace. In this unbelievable true crime story, we dive into the mind of a man psychologists deemed impermeable to intervention. A predator so intimidating that after his parole was granted, not a single halfway house in Montreal would accept him after witnessing his behavior. Why did his own roommates choose to sleep in hallways rather than share space with him?
Hells Angel hitman who killed a man in Nova Scotia has seen his day parole revoked because inmates at a halfway house were scared. They were too scared to go to sleep in the same room as Daniel Kelsie, and his handlers couldn't find another halfway house that would take him.
What made his employers fire him after just 1 month? And most chillingly, how did a man whose life sentence should have kept him behind bars end up terrorizing those trying to help him re-enter society? Buckle up. This is the story they don't want you to hear. The streets have a way of claiming their own, often long before anyone notices the transfer of ownership. For Dean Daniel Kelsie, that quiet claim happened in shadows and whispers, pulling him into a world where teenage concerns like prom dates and college applications became distant, forgotten fantasies. His official dance with the law commenced at just 18, that fragile age suspended between childhood dreams and adult consequences. But there was nothing fragile about the path he chose. His first mugshot captured more than just a face. It documented the birth of something harder, something still forming beneath the surface. The police camera's flash illuminated eyes, already growing cold, already calculating, already looking past the immediate trouble towards something darker waiting beyond.
Police criminal record began when he was 18. Your convictions include theft, assault causing bodily harm, resisting arrest, uttering threats, robbery, mischief, obstruction of a police officer, possession of substances, drug trafficking, said the parole board.
Those early convictions weren't random stumbles, but deliberate steps. Theft gave way to assault, which evolved into bodily harm. Each escalation added another brick to the foundation of his reputation. When officers attempted arrests, Kelsie's resistance wasn't panic, but performance. A show of defiance that sent messages rippling through the criminal underworld. His threats weren't empty. They carried weight that made even veteran cops shift uncomfortably. Each charge is another nail in the coffin of whatever legitimate life might have been possible. What burned inside Kelsie that pushed him toward this relentless progression? What wounds or rage or emptiness demanded such constant feeding? Then came the whispers. At first just courthouse rumors, then documented connections, linking him to figures whose leather cuts bore the infamous Death's Head patch. The Hells Angels don't invite just anyone into their circle. They seek men with particular qualities: unflinching loyalty, comfort with violence, and a willingness to cross lines others won't approach. Something in Kelsie's demeanor and his capabilities caught their attention. Hells Angel hitman, the 3 words would eventually follow him through court documents, news headlines, and parole hearings like a shadow that couldn't be shaken. Those 3 words carried implications that transformed him from a common criminal to something else entirely. A weapon aimed deliberately at specific targets. A man whose violence served organized purpose. The young man who might have been was disappearing, fading into memory with each new charge, each deeper connection to the club. In his place emerged something engineered for a specific purpose, something that would soon be aimed at a man named Sean Simmons, triggering consequences that would echo through decades. How does a man's life become forfeit over another man's wounded pride? For Sean Simmons, the fatal answer came on an ordinary October day in 2000, when the lobby of a Dartmouth apartment building transformed into the final scene of his life story. The crime that ended him wasn't random, but calculated. A deliberate erasing tied to the unforgivable sin of having an affair with the wrong woman, the wife of a Hells Angels member whose honor demanded blood payment.
The court heard Simmons was killed for having an affair with the wife of a member of the Hells Angels motorcycle gang.
Kelsie didn't hesitate when the order came. After all, wasn't this precisely what his escalating pattern of violence had been preparing him for? The methodical stalking, the cold approach, and then the killing itself, executed with the mechanical precision that separates professionals from amateurs. The lobby's security camera captured only fragments of the encounter, yet the aftermath told the complete story. Simmons sprawled on cold tile, life pooling beneath him, while Kelsie disappeared into the shadow world that had molded him. Court testimony would later reconstruct those moments in clinical detail, yet what could never be captured was the internal landscape of a man who could perform such an act and walk away.
Police 51, serving a life sentence for the October 2000 shooting death of Sean Simmons in the lobby of Dartmouth NS apartment buildings.
What thoughts occupied Kelsie's mind as he watched Simmons fall? Did he feel power, emptiness, or perhaps nothing at all? The most chilling possibility of the three? The justice system's response was swift and severe. March 2003 marked the beginning of Kelsie's life sentence, with convictions for conspiracy to commit murder and first-degree murder later appealed down to second-degree. Yet prison walls, designed to contain ordinary criminals, struggled to hold a man for whom violence had become second nature. The concrete corridors of his new home merely provided fresh territory to establish dominance. Fellow inmates became targets as Kelsie carved out his reputation behind bars through strategic violence. Documented assaults in 2008 and 2015 weren't random outbursts, but calculated demonstrations.
In addition, you have been convicted of assaulting a fellow inmate 2018 or 2008, 2015, and of May 2024. So listen, if he was convicted of all these assaults, how the hell did he get paroled to get out in a halfway house? He just assaulted someone last year. It's crazy.
When questioned about these attacks, Kelsie's response revealed volumes about his psychology.
You described these offenses as fight you claim to have won. You noted that the victims were willing to fight you and that you acted the way you did to put an end to a conflict. You explained that you had no choice as you had to be seen as strong to survive.
A prison psychologist's evaluation cut through Kelsie's self-justifications with clinical precision. The assessment, moderate to high risk of recidivism and violence, translated the obvious into official language. Furthermore, the report noted another troubling observation.
I guess, he had to go in front of a psychiatrist, and it's moderate to high, and his lengthy incarceration has had an impact on his ability to socialize properly.
But had prison created this disconnection, or merely reinforced what was already there? Despite these red flags waving like violent crimson warnings, the parole board granted him day release in September 2021. a decision that reflected either extraordinary optimism about human rehabilitation or a systemic failure to recognize danger when it stood before them, documenting fights as victories and viewing intimidation as a survival strategy. Freedom, however limited by parole restrictions, proved too complex a terrain for a man whose understanding of human interaction had been forged primarily through dominance and fear. The halfway house became simply another environment to control, another yard to rule, with consequences that would soon prove disastrous for Kelsie's tenuous grip on freedom. Can a predator ever truly change its nature? For Dean Daniel Kelsie, the answer materialized in the fearful eyes of his halfway house roommates, men who chose to sleep outside their shared room rather than spend unconscious hours in his presence.
Your roommates slept outside the room to avoid conflicts with you. I'm just surprised they let him out of the prison, I guess. Wow.
Though the walls were no longer prison concrete and the doors technically unlocked, Kelsie carried his cell with him in his demeanor, his expectations, and his inability to exist among others without dominating them.
Kelsie's first got day parole in September 2001. He lost it again after getting into a conflict with another resident of the halfway house. He was transferred to another halfway house, but that didn't work out either.
His transition to the Quebec halfway house in summer 2023 should have represented a triumph, yet it quickly deteriorated into a textbook case of institutional failure. From the very beginning, tension simmered between Kelsie and the other residents.
According to your case management team, from the beginning of your stay in a halfway house, you had significant difficulties living with your roommates.
An invisible field of threat and intimidation that made others instinctively give way, as prey animals sense predators before seeing them. His parole decision was noted with clinical understatement, saying,
Anyway, quote, you could be intimidated in your nonverbal behavior, and you explain your expectations to your roommates and made comments that seemed threatening to others.
Between these bureaucratic lines lay the reality. A man whose very presence disrupted the delicate ecology of rehabilitation, whose shadow fell too heavily across others struggling toward their own redemption. The employment situation fared no better, unraveling in less than a month due to what employers described as intimidating, aggressive behavior toward supervisors.
You were also sentenced to 18 months probation for uttering threats. You committed this offense while on day parole against a coworker. Kelsie was granted parole again last July. He found a job, but was fired after less than a month, said the parole board. The reason for the dismissal was for being intimidating, aggressive towards supervisor.
But what else could they have expected from a man whose entire adult framework for human interaction had been constructed in environments where showing weakness meant becoming a target? How does one suddenly transform dominance instincts into collaborative skills without fundamental rewiring of the psyche? By October 2023, the situation had deteriorated so severely that handlers subjected Kelsie to a formal behavior plan, essentially asking a wolf to sign a contract promising not to howl at the moon. Despite halfway house staff making it abundantly clear that they were offering him a unique opportunity that he had to seize, Kelsie reverted to the strategies that had preserved him for decades: intimidation, aggression, and the establishment of dominance hierarchies where he stood unchallenged at the apex. His parole suspension followed inevitably, yet even then, something remarkable happened. Or rather, didn't happen. Despite applications to several halfway houses in the Montreal area, Not a single facility would accept him. His reputation, that invisible force field of menace, preceded him, closing doors before he could even approach them. Meanwhile, Kelsie himself refused placement in areas outside his chosen territory, demonstrating once again that his terms were the only terms he recognized.
Your case management team has applied to several halfway houses in Montreal area, but your applications have been denied. At each location, said Kelse's parole board decision, which notes that he also refuses placement at a halfway house in any other area.
The parole board's final assessment, cut through years of institutional optimism with devastating clarity.
That redacted from the decision, the parole board found that Kelsie was unable to adjust his attitude and behavior. I guess he could serve out his life sentence in prison, right? You appear to be impermeable to an intervention, said the parole board's decision.
5 words that encapsulated decades of violent behavior, failed rehabilitation attempts, and a fundamental inability to adapt to society's basic requirements for coexistence. What had been manufactured over years in the criminal underworld and hardened through prison life couldn't simply be unmade through programs and behavior contracts. And so, Dean Daniel Kelsie returned to the environment perhaps best suited to his particular adaptation, prison walls and controlled movement, where the rules of engagement aligned with his understanding of the world. Outside those walls, roommates slept easier. Halfway house staff exhaled with relief. And many had suspected from the beginning. Some predators cannot change their fundamental nature, regardless of the opportunities offered or the consequences imposed.